Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm going to take you through one of the strangest military campaigns in modern history, the Great Emu War of 1932. You may have heard this story as a humorous footnote, but it reveals something deeper about the relationship between human ambition and the natural world. Picture this: the Australian Army, armed with Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition, deployed to the wheat fields of Western Australia. Their enemy? Not an invading force, not insurgents, but thousands of large flightless birds called emus. The outcome was not what anyone in the Defense Ministry expected. By the end of this talk, you'll understand exactly what happened, why it failed, and why this peculiar chapter still resonates nearly a century later. Here's how we'll explore this story today. We'll begin with the historical context. Why were there thousands of former soldiers farming marginal land in Western Australia in the early 1930s? Then we'll look at the emus themselves. Why did 20,000 of them suddenly descend on the wheat belt? From there, we'll examine the military operation itself, who was involved, what equipment they brought, and how the campaign played out week by week. Finally, we'll tally the results and consider what the Emu War tells us about the limits of military solutions to ecological problems. Let's start by setting the stage. To understand the Emu War, we have to go back to the years following the First World War. Australia, like many nations, was grappling with how to reintegrate thousands of returning soldiers. The government's solution was ambitious: give them land and turn them into farmers. But the land they were given was marginal at best, dry, remote, and unforgiving. When the Great Depression hit, these soldier settlers found themselves in an impossible position. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, the emus arrived. The soldier settlement scheme was born of noble intentions. After the First World War, the Australian government wanted to reward its veterans while also developing the nation's interior. Thousands of former soldiers were granted plots in regions like the Campion district of Western Australia. They cleared the land, planted wheat, and tried to build a life. But the land was marginal: low rainfall, fragile soils. When the Great Depression struck, wheat prices collapsed. Farmers were instructed to increase production to compensate, which meant planting even more. By 1932, they were stretched to the breaking point. And that's when the emus changed their migration route. Emus are remarkable animals, standing nearly 2 meters tall, weighing up to 45 kilograms, and capable of running at 50 kilometers per hour. They're also nomadic. In a normal year, they follow the rain across the vast Australian interior, never staying in one place long enough to cause serious damage. But 1932 was not a normal year. A severe drought pushed the emu population out of their usual range and directly into the newly cleared wheat farms of the Campion district. For the emus, it was paradise: thousands of hectares of neatly planted, well-watered crops. For the farmers, it was a catastrophe. They did something that seems almost unthinkable today. They asked the Australian government to send in the military. And the government said yes. Sir George Pearce, the Minister of Defence, approved the deployment of Australian Army troops to the wheat belt. It was officially classified as a wildlife management operation, but the press had other ideas. Newspapers across the country gleefully dubbed it the Emu War, and the public followed every development with a mix of amusement and incredulity. Let's meet the combatants. Let's look at the two sides of this conflict. On the Australian side, the operation was commanded by Major Meredith, an experienced artillery officer from the Royal Australian Artillery's 7th Heavy Battery. He was assigned just 2 other soldiers, Sergeant McMurray and Gunner O'Halloran, and 2 Lewis light machine guns with 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The Lewis gun was a formidable weapon, capable of laying down devastating fire, but it was designed for stationary targets or massed infantry formations, not for fast-moving, widely dispersed wildlife. Oh, and as a side note, the troops were also tasked with collecting 100 emu skins. The Defense Department wanted the feathers for decorating light horsemen's hats. On the other side, 20,000 emus, no weapons, no strategy, no commander, but extraordinary physical capabilities and instincts honed by millennia of surviving in one of the world's harshest environments. The campaign stretched from early November to mid-December 1932, and it was anything but smooth. On November 2nd, the soldiers spotted about 50 emus and opened fire. Immediately, one of the guns jammed. The emus scattered. A few days later, they tried an ambush strategy, hiding the guns near a dam where emus came to drink. They killed about 20, but the birds quickly learned to avoid the area. By November 9th, Major Meredith was ordered to withdraw. The press had a field day. Headlines declared the emus victorious, but the government wasn't done yet. Within days, the campaign resumed with new tactics, including mounting a machine gun on a truck. It didn't help much. On December 10th, the operation was permanently terminated. Now let's zoom in on that first day, November 2nd, 1932. The soldiers had set up their position near the Campion district, and they spotted a group of about 50 emus moving through the wheat fields. It looked like an easy target. They opened fire. And then, almost instantly, one of the Lewis guns jammed. These weapons were notorious for overheating, and in the dusty, hot conditions of the outback, they were prone to stoppages. But the real problem was the emus themselves. Unlike soldiers, emus don't march in formation. They don't take cover in predictable patterns. The moment the first shots rang out, the birds scattered, sprinting, zigzagging, vanishing behind scrub. Only a handful were hit. Major Meredith, watching this unfold, must have realized with sinking certainty that this was going to be much harder than anyone had anticipated. This is the most famous quote to come out of the Emu War, and it deserves to be read in full. Major Meredith filed this report after weeks of frustration in the field, and you can hear the genuine, almost grudging, respect in his words. He compares the emus to Zulu warriors, a reference that would have resonated deeply with a British Commonwealth military officer of his generation. The Zulus were legendary for their discipline and resilience in battle. He says the birds could absorb bullets like tanks. He says that if he had soldiers with the same durability, they could conquer the world. This is not mockery. This is a professional soldier confronting the limits of military force against a problem it was never designed to solve. So what happened after the guns fell silent? The Emu War ended on December 10, 1932, and the results were, by any military standard, underwhelming. But the story doesn't end there. The failure of the military campaign forced the government to rethink its approach entirely. And in the years that followed, a very different strategy emerged, one that acknowledged a fundamental truth the Army had learned the hard way. You cannot machine gun an ecological problem into submission. Let's talk about the numbers, because they tell the story as clearly as any narrative could. Over 6 weeks, the Australian Army confirmed 986 emus killed. That's out of an estimated population of 20,000, roughly 5%. And even that figure is disputed. Some reports suggest an additional 2,500 emus later died of injuries, but those numbers were never verified. Meanwhile, the Army expended nearly 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Do the maths. That's approximately 10 bullets for every confirmed kill. At a time when Australia was deep in the Depression, this was an extraordinary waste of resources. The farmers' crops continued to be devastated. The emu population was barely dented. The operation was, by any measure, a failure. Now let's pull back and ask, why do we still talk about this nearly a century later? The Emu War has become something far bigger than a failed pest control operation. It's entered global folklore. The sheer absurdity of machine guns versus flightless birds is irresistible. You'll find it referenced everywhere, from YouTube deep dives to Reddit forums to video games. Within Australia, it's a wry national inside joke. The one war the Army fought, and the birds decisively won. But beyond the humor, ecologists point to it as a genuine cautionary tale. You cannot shoot your way out of an ecological imbalance. And here's the final irony. The emu, the bird that defeated the Australian Army, sits proudly on the national coat of arms right beside the kangaroo. It is, quite literally, an unkillable national symbol. Let me leave you with this. The Great Emu War is easy to laugh at, and we should. It's genuinely funny. 3 soldiers, 2 Lewis guns, 10,000 rounds of ammunition, and the birds still won. But underneath the comedy is something more sobering. This was a moment when human confidence met natural resilience head-on, and nature didn't blink. The emus didn't need trenches or tactics or firepower, they just needed to be emus. Fast, scattered, adaptable, and indifferent to our plans. The government eventually found better answers: exclusion fencing, licensed culling, bounties that aligned farmer incentives with ecological reality. Those solutions worked because they accepted the emu as a force of nature rather than an enemy to be conquered. That's the real lesson from Campion, Western Australia, 1932. Sometimes the smartest move isn't to declare war, it's to learn how to share the land.